check for a couple of things. One of the most obvious things to search for is, I'll search for some cameras that might be exposed to the internet because it's quite a visual thing to show. So I'm going to use one manufacturer here called Yawcam. We'll just search for them. So searching for any computer that had the word Yawcam somewhere in it. And we have 1,015 computers currently on the internet with this in it. And if I scroll down, you can see, for example, it's actually captured some images from some of these cameras, right? Like so on, and whatever the case may be, person there. And just to prove that these are actually real, these are fully exposed web cameras, let's take this one. So this is the United States, right? So let me think. Time in the United States right now, so we just go to that one. Just to prove it's live, it should be at least a different kind of time of day or different type of, okay, that was a bad example because it's exactly the same time of day. Let's pick one other one just to show that they're actually live images. Something a bit more interesting. I have no idea what that is. We'll pick, I'm not going to pick the one of the person. That's just cruel. Let's pick this one, someone in Brazil. Got somebody in Brazil up here right now. And the reason I'm picking these ones, by the way, is these are fully exposed to, there we go, so we have people. Right, so we don't need to look at the people. The whole point is these are live, right? These are live webcams. The reason I picked those ones is because that's not hacking. Those are publicly exposed on the internet. There's no password prompts, there's no authentication, there's no nothing. This is just like browsing to it the same way as you browse to Amazon.com, right? We can also check, for example, are any of these exposed in the Philippines from that particular manufacturer? And no, they're not. At least for that particular manufacturer, right? For Yawcam. If we search for other ones, you certainly would find them. So just for example, we'll pick one. This one here, Webcam 7. This is a different manufacturer that has that in their kind of computers. And for the Philippines, we get a few examples, right? They don't have screenshots of them here. There's only one in this case. The reason I pointed this one out is it has a login and password to gain access to that. But unfortunately, that particular vendor has known vulnerabilities in it, and it also has known like default login and passwords. So from an attacker point of view, it's fairly trivial to get access to that sort of material. Some other things. Let's keep on the kind of Philippines track here and see some other cool things we can find in the Philippines. So this one, I'm going to search for this, but let's put it in the Philippines as well. So, country PH. Give it a second there. So while that's searching, anyone know what a DICOM server is? So DICOM, and we're going to get some hits here. Hopefully, this is much less visual than webcams to look at, right? You're just getting this like text field back. But we'll see how many hits we get here. But DICOM is medical image servers. So like X-rays, MRI scans, all that kind of stuff. And there's 19 of those servers in the Philippines right now that are exposed to the internet. Now, exposed doesn't mean hackable, right? It means it's just accessible, so an attacker can connect to them. But of course, that's a first step any attacker would take in terms of compromising it, looking for credentials, gaining access to what in this case can be very, very sensitive type medical information about somebody, right? And especially like, you know, scans for cancer, scans for anything like that, you would find them in a kind of DICOM server. And just one final one, Shodan's actually made this even easier for attackers. They have a site called Shodan Images. And Shodan Images just essentially does the same thing as Shodan, but it just records any time where it could take a screenshot of anything that was more visual in nature, like the web cameras, right? So we can search here, for example, for all the images recorded in the last 24 hours or so from again, country code PH from the Philippines. And give that a second there. And what you'll see is that most of the ones that come back are going to look more like this. They're just Windows, yeah, so Windows desktops, but they need login and passwords and so on. So they're as secure, at least as secure as the password is, right? But we can filter that stuff out, so we can say, where is it? I think it's like minus, so I do minus screenshot, yeah. So I'm just filtering out the desktop stuff, so I don't want to see the stuff that Shodan has recognized as a Windows desktop. I want to see other sorted devices. Let me just see what sort of stuff shows up here. Give it a little second. No results found. Perfect. There was one this morning. This is the problem with doing live demos and live information. This morning you could actually see one which was a retail monitoring system. So essentially the back end for a shop, for like point of sale devices and stuff for what appeared to be a hardware shop, where you had access to all of the kind of credit card and point of sale devices and so on. Okay, so IoT, unfortunately, on the internet, very, very easy to find. And because things can be hacked, anytime you hack something, crime follows very quickly afterwards. So some recent stories of criminal kind of activity that involves hacks. So we had, harder to see here, but we had in the case of 2 million web cameras that were exposed a couple of months ago. In that case, it was a kind of default login password credential issue, so very easy to do. There's been a rise in cases of people with smart homes being used against them, where people would come into the home and essentially, no, it can go away. This is the problem with having to have internet access for some demos, little pop-ups and things. Right, so you have people using their homes against them, so talking to them through their smart speakers, through like Nest devices and so on, and then we've had yet another camera attack here. I wanted to point out the camera ones in particular, because if you buy a webcam on Amazon for $30, don't expect that a lot of investment went into the securing of that device. The main thing from the manufacturer was, can I get a crisp image to the person in real time, it doesn't crash, that kind of thing, right? So think about the 2 million devices for a minute. What could an attacker do with 2 million connected web cameras? So if your thoughts immediately went to, well, you could extort people, right? Then congratulations, you're now thinking like a hacker. But you're not thinking like a criminal. Because from a criminal point of view, they have to figure out a way to monitor 2 million web camera feeds for that 1 minute where somebody does something stupid or becomes naked or whatever that they can extort them with. They then need to find a way to identify the person in the video, contact them in their own language, extort them, which most people aren't going to fall for, get paid, and all without leaving a paper trail. That is a terrible, terrible business model. Do you guys have like Dragon's Den here or something like that? One of those shows where you pitch ideas to business people on TV? If you did that with this, you will not get investment, right? This is not a good business model. So what criminals do instead is they use all of those devices, even if it's like a camera or medical imaging server or whatever, for what they really are, which is essentially poor, low-powered computing devices. And then you use them for something like a distributed denial of service attack. So you use all those computers to essentially extort and hammer somebody's network with them. And now from a criminal point of view, you don't have to figure out how to extort 2 million people. You just have to figure out how to extort one person, right? And the 2 million people you've infected probably won't even notice that they're infected, or they won't actually care, even if they are. And that's exactly what today's attacks are doing. So last year we saw an IoT botnet, the largest one ever, which was 1.3 terabytes per second, aimed at the coding site github.com. And these sort of DDoS attacks are even worse than that. So we saw a couple of years ago, it was like 2 years ago now, a Mirai-based IoT botnet succeeded in taking an entire country offline, which was Liberia. Now, it's not the biggest country in the world, it doesn't have the strongest internet connection, but that's still impressive. An IoT botnet knocks a country offline for a few hours. And we're seeing criminals go beyond this and think of other ways. So with routers, I don't know which one you use, router, whatever, the American version or not, what criminals are now starting to do is connect to them, change your what's called DNS settings, which is how you look up domain names to IP addresses, and then they essentially uninstall the malware from the router when they're done. So they just change that one setting and then gone. And what that means for the victim of that router attack is for 99% of the websites you go to, no difference. But when you go to your bank or to Facebook or some other site that has a credential that is valuable to resale, they will then change you to a very advanced phishing site for that particular bank or whatever the case may be. And it's very, very difficult for anybody to notice that type of thing. So those are some of the attacks we're seeing today. Let's go and talk about some of the kind of mega trends we're seeing in the future. All right, so first of all, we talked about the sheer scale of kind of cybercrime attacks. We talked about data breaches and about the kind of emergence of IoT. So I'm going to talk about 5 trends that I would expect to see in the next kind of 12 months or so. Why do we have 3 trends for today and 5 for tomorrow? Well, as Paul said, I'm in a future research team, so my entire effort is focused on what's happening next. So you're stuck with me, guys, so apologies. Okay, so what are we expecting to see in the future of cybercrime attacks? First of all, we will have much, much more malware targeting our flying cars and our hoverboards. Here, like so. Joking aside, right, I'm only going to focus on things that are going to probably happen in about the next 12 months or so. So Don't expect to see many revolutionary ideas in here, it's more evolutionary. So like today's trends evolving onto that a little bit. Also because when you're predicting things far in the future with security, it's kind of hard to do. For example, I'm pretty sure Marty McFly would be pretty horrified if he knew that we consider these things to be hoverboards these days. That is not what he was hoping for in the 1980s. So we've got 5 trends here. First one is on ransomware attacks. So we expect to see widespread ransomware drop even more than it is today. So the ransomware that hits people and wants like $300 from one human, that doesn't really work so well anymore because today's security software that people have on their home PCs does actually a very good job of stopping ransomware attacks and even having backup and things like that in place. So what we're going to see on the flip side is we're going to see what we call post-intrusion ransomware is happening much, much more. So this is where a skilled attacker gains access to a highly important network and they deploy a ransomware after they've fully understood how the network works and they've compromised and turned off all the security. They then install ransomware on the victim, and by the time they have actually engaged that ransomware, they know how much you're able to pay, and they know you have no chance of actually stopping the ransomware from running on the network. It's been on their network for about 2 months by that point. And this works particularly well against critical services like hospitals, schools, things like that that don't have a lot of money for a security budget, but can get money if they have to, because they're government bodies and things like that. So they can pay if they really have to. And we're seeing this all across the US at the moment. So the US is getting hammered by this kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of different families in this at the moment. So Ryuk is one, Sobaniki is another one. We expect the kind of organized crime groups behind this to start creating their own ones as opposed to buying off the shelf ones. A second trend is extortion will evolve even further. So the reason I put this one up is traditionally cybercrime is theft-based attacks, but we're moving to more extortion-based models instead. So we've seen a lot of disinformation campaigns, or fake news, if you like, being deployed today in both politics and all sorts of different walks of life. And this is a case of a video manipulation of a US politician called Nancy Pelosi. And what they did was to simply slow down the video of her speech so that it appeared kind of slurred or like she was drunk or senile or something like that. And that was shared 2.5 million times on Facebook. Now, of the 2.5 million people, of course, a lot of people realized that was a fake video, but a lot of them didn't, because you could see the common thread of people calling for her to step down and that she was no longer fit for office and all of those type of things. And the reason I highlighted that is it's related to a trend that we see emerging, which personally worries me a lot, which is something called deepfake technology. So what deepfake technology is essentially using AI algorithms to do image or video manipulation, or audio also. And I won't go into deep level details on it, pun intended, but essentially you take a video that you want to superimpose somebody's face onto, or audio and you want to impose their voice pattern onto what was said. And that is, when you think about how that works, in the near future you could get a call from your CEO, right, that is a video call that is very believable, looks just like them, sounds just like them, telling you to transfer money to some bank account that is, slightly unusual for you. If you're familiar with business email compromise, that's essentially just the next level on from business email compromise. And that's not even that far off. That's really only a few months off the technology being that good to do this kind of thing. But of all the things with deepfakes, the one that kind of keeps me awake most at night is an idea we have, which would be something called deepfake ransomware. So simply put, this is combining today's extortion-based ransomware business models we see criminals doing with deepfake technology. So essentially you have an attacker who has an incriminating video of some description, and then they simply need to gather enough pictures and audio of their target to create the video to make it look like it comes from that person, right? Which, if they're a public figure, that's very easy to do. But even for anybody today, we all are guilty of oversharing things on the internet. We're also guilty of taking far too many selfies. So it's very simple to get a lot of pictures of somebody's face if you want to, and getting audio is really not that hard either. So the attacker creates a video. They then simply upload it to a private link of some description, so it's on the internet but hasn't been published yet. They set a counter to 24 or 48 hours, they set up like a Bitcoin wallet to receive the payment on, and then they extort the person and say, unless you pay us in the next 48 hours, we will send this video to all of your friends, right? So the risk of those type of attacks will actually work really well against two main groups of people. The first is politicians, and the second one is teenagers. So for politicians, they have the major problem, just like the Nancy Pelosi one, that nobody fact checks information anymore. So even though the video of 2 days later people realize it's fake, the damage is already done by that point to their career, especially if this was like a day or two before an election. And that makes them very, very good for extorting from a criminal point of view. And then for the teenager side, unfortunately what will most likely happen there is attackers will take images of a very compromising nature, so something nudity or something sexually related. They will then look to superimpose the person's head onto that. And this is, if you're familiar with sextortion scams, which exist today, this is essentially really useful for the attackers because the biggest problem with a sextortion scam, if you are a criminal, is trying to get somebody to perform the sexual act on a webcam so you can then extort them. With this, you're getting extorted for something you didn't actually do, but it looks like you did. So it scales up much, much, much better from an attacker point of view. And the reason why that works unfortunately well, actually there's certain demographics that just wouldn't work for. Right? For most of the people in this room, it doesn't scale that well. So take me for example, if this happened to me and the video got published, my friends would mock me over it, right? They would, be like, oh my God, did you see the video of Bob? But they wouldn't really believe it's me in the video, right? So they'd take one look at it and they'd go, okay, well, I know Bob and he drinks a lot of Guinness, there's no way his chest looks that good, right? So the weird thing here is that making this work, the hardest thing might be reference videos from sites like slightlypastitdadbods.com or something like that. But on the teenage side, teenagers are, number one, becoming very aware of their bodies. They're also very driven by how their peers perceive them, more than any other kind of group in society. So even though they don't have as much money as a politician would have to pay, they can and will try to pay, and are less likely to reach out for help. And existing sextortion campaigns have led to teenage suicides. We've had at least 3 in Ireland. I know there's more in other countries, that people have killed themselves rather than pay from the shame of what they've done. And remember, deepfake ransomware scales this up. So when this starts kicking in, and there's no reason why it won't, we will unfortunately see suicides as a result of this type of attack. So that's all kind of doom and gloom, so we'll move on to another one, because teenage suicide is not the greatest topic for 10 o'clock in the morning. So, third one of the 5 is criminals will go deeper into the financial systems. So what I mean by this is, previously banking-oriented criminals focus very much on the consumer, so the end user, and use like classic in-browser attacks to get your login credentials for the bank and then clear you out of that money. And then they started targeting businesses, because businesses have more money. And then a couple of years ago, the banks, you see, for ages were seen as invincible. But after some of the recent attacks on SWIFT networks and ATM networks, it's very clear that the idea that banks are invincible has disappeared from attackers' minds. So we're seeing more and more attacks like that. In fact, there was the Bangladesh bank attack, which was famous, involved the Philippines here as well, because some of the money was transferred into Philippines bank accounts. So we expect these high-end organized crime groups to evolve and focus more on these kind of, not just the banks themselves, because they now understand how banks work. They're going to look at the interbank system itself, so how banks communicate to each other. So looking at central banks, clearinghouses, ATM networks, that kind of thing. And speaking of ATM networks, we actually did a paper on this a few years ago with Europol focusing on ATM malware. And what we found was at the time there was 2 main nexuses of where criminals who could do ATM malware came from. There was 1 or 2 groups located down in South America, and there was another nexus of about 3 groups in Russia. But at the time they were the only ones that had anything ATM related. Nowadays it's a commodity. Any of us can go onto a cybercriminal forum and buy an ATM malware kit for about 1,000 euros. So as a result of that, we will start seeing ATM malware attacks spread to other regions. So all around here in Southeast Asia, all around Europe, and places that haven't been targeted before, because any criminal can buy this stuff these days. And then second last one, which is on the underground side of things. So criminal underground, we expect to see that evolve a bit as well. As over the last few years, law enforcement have gotten a little bit better at shutting down some of these services, and criminals are responding as a result. So there was a particular website, which is not really a criminal hacking forum, but 8chan, which was shut down after one of the latest rounds of shooting in the United States. Actually, I don't even know if you count it as the latest one, because there's been a bunch since, unfortunately. But as soon as that was shut down, a mirror, an unofficial mirror, was set up called 08chan on a network called ZeroNet. And ZeroNet is a little bit different from the internet in that everybody who's connected to ZeroNet is essentially hosting part of the content. So it's very hard to take down. There's not like a server where you can go and pull the plug on. You have to pull the plug on every single person that's in that network to get rid of the material. So it's different from Tor. Tor gives you privacy, and ZeroNet does not at all. But we're seeing criminals looking at those kind of areas where how do we make our connections even more private using things like Tor overlays, and then how do we distribute our networks of command and control servers and hosting servers so they are much, much more difficult to take down. Now in the case of ZeroNet, they're probably not going to use that for a few reasons. One is that if you were part of a network like that, you are helping to host every piece of material that is on that network. So if somebody decided to set up a ZeroNet site for child abuse material, you will have a copy of some of that on your computer too, because you're hosting it for everybody. Which means you have in almost every country in the world, you have immediately broken the law the second you do that. So that's not great, but we're seeing also a lot more collaboration between criminals in different countries than ever before. So you see Russians and German forums, Chinese speakers and English forums and so on, that they collaborate and sell to each other. So it's a very vibrant market and much more collaboration than in the past. And then the last one, the one I'll finish on, then we'll have time for questions. And this one's actually a bit of a non-prediction. So, which might be, not everybody will agree with me in this one, including people in my own team. I don't think that artificial intelligence will be heavily used and abused by criminals in the next 12 months. I think on the defensive side, so in cybersecurity, absolutely, artificial intelligence is critical to how we defend against attacks today. But from an attacker point of view, there isn't really a driving reason to move to using AI for three main reasons. The first one is if it's not broke, you don't need to fix it, right? So people often think that criminals have to constantly evolve to keep ahead of things. But if you think about it, every year, more and more people come online. So if you think of that like a big pie and you're getting market share off it, then as a criminal, you don't really need to compete against the other criminals. You're just trying to get to some of those new users before anybody else does. The second reason is that AI and machine learning requires lots of data. Now, if you run a botnet, you can, of course, hoover up all that data if you really wanted to from all the connected machines. But to do that, you are going to put yourself more at risk that people will realize you've infected the machine because you've just exfiltrated a ton of data off it. And the third one, and this is kind of one people don't really think about, is that AI and machine learning requires specialist skills, right? Now, of course, there's a lot of online courses you can do today to learn it. But think for a minute, if you're doing a computer science degree, at what stage do you normally learn AI or machine learning? It's like the last year or second last year of college, or maybe in like master's level course, right? If you're a cyber criminal, you don't get that far in college. In most cases, most cyber criminals start in their teenage years, right? And if you're suddenly making 50,000 a month or 100,000 a month, you don't bother going to college, right? You don't get to that stage of your life. So just pure human nature, you don't get to the stage where you learn the stuff naturally. You have to actually, you have to decide to upskill yourself. And if your life involves stealing money and living on a beach somewhere, then you're not exactly having incentive to do this. So with that, hopefully I've given a bit of insight into some of the main cybercrime trends that we see today and some of the ones that we're expecting to see in the future. So with that, I'm happy to take